I still have the note. Most people assume I threw it away, burned it, maybe, or tore it into pieces at the bottom of some dumpster in Clarksburg, West Virginia the night I found it. But I didn't. I put it in a gallon Ziploc bag, pressed out the air, and tucked it inside the lining of a backpack I've carried ever since. Worn straps, blue canvas. Smells like 12 years of being someone who refused to disappear. The note itself is 3 sentences long. My mother's handwriting. Neat, looping, the kind of cursive they actually taught in Ohio schools back in the 80s. She used a black Sharpie. Pressed hard. Like the words needed to be permanent. I want to tell you about the night I found it. But first, I need you to understand something about who I was at 17, because who I was is the only reason any of what comes next makes sense. And also because I've spent a long time being angry at a girl who didn't deserve it. That girl was me, and she was doing everything right. My name is Maya Calloway. I grew up in Clarksburg, a small city in the middle of West Virginia, where the traffic lights on Pike Street still blink yellow after 10 p.m., and everybody knows what shift your daddy works. We lived on Maple Run Drive, a cul-de-sac with 6 houses, a cracked basketball hoop at the end, and a neighbor named Mrs. Pruitt who grew tomatoes and watched everyone's business from behind a window screen. My family was, on the surface, ordinary. My dad, Gerald, worked logistics for a distribution company out of Bridgeport. My mom, Carol, did part-time bookkeeping for a dental office and volunteered on the PTA when it suited her image. My brother Trent was 20 and had recently enrolled in a trade program in Pennsylvania. At least, that's what we were told. I was a junior at Robert C. Byrd High School, working 12 hours a week at the Mountaineer Diner on Main and pulling a 3.9 GPA because I understood, in the way some kids just do, that grades were my only ticket anywhere. I was the kind of girl who kept lists, scholarship deadlines, tuition estimates, part-time job hours mapped against monthly savings goals. I had a folder on my desk labeled After, in blue marker, fat with printouts about state universities and community college transfer pathways. In life, I've learned that sometimes challenging situations present opportunities to be thought-provoking and disruptive. My best friend Dara Whitfield used to sit on my bed while I updated my spreadsheets and shake her head like I was slightly unhinged. "Maya," she'd say, "you are 16 years old." And I'd say, "I'm almost 17, and she'd throw a pillow at me. That was our whole dynamic, and I loved it more than I knew how to say out loud. I want to be honest with you about my family. I don't want to paint them as monsters, because that would be the easy version of this story, and the easy version wouldn't explain why what they did hurt the way it did. The truth is messier. The truth is that my mom wasn't cruel so much as she was selective. Her warmth had conditions. Her attention followed whoever she thought reflected best on her, and for most of my life, that person was Trent. Trent, who was charming in the way that people are charming when they've never been told no. Trent, who borrowed money and called it borrowing and never paid it back. Trent, who could walk into a room and make my father laugh in a way I somehow never could, even when I tried. I didn't hate my brother. I just understood, early, that there wasn't enough space in my mother's heart for both of us, and that I had lost that competition before I knew it was happening. Before I go further, if you're watching from somewhere in the middle of your own complicated story, or maybe just the middle of your Thursday night, I want to say hi, drop a comment, and tell me where you're watching from. And if stories like this one, the kind where someone quiet decides they've had enough, are the stories you live for, consider subscribing. There are more of them coming. Now, let me tell you about the Friday I came home to an empty house. It was the second Friday in October. The maples on our street had gone full amber, that particular West Virginia fall color that looks almost too good to be real, like someone oversaturated a photo. I'd worked a double at the diner, 9 a.m. to 9 p.m., because Renee had called out sick and I needed the hours. I smelled like bacon grease and coffee. My feet were killing me. I remember all of this because when something breaks your life in half, you remember the smell of the moment before it happened. The house felt wrong before I even opened the door. It wasn't dark. The porch light was on, same as always. But there was something about the weight of it, a stillness that houses don't usually have when people are inside them. I remember standing on the porch for a moment with my key in my hand, just listening, nothing. They probably went out to dinner, I told myself. Mom probably dragged Dad to that new Italian place on the highway she'd been talking about. I unlocked the door, stepped inside. The living room rug was gone. I noticed that first. The round braided one that had been in front of the couch since I was in elementary school. Just gone. A pale rectangle on the hardwood where it used to be. I walked into the kitchen. The spice rack was stripped. The good pots, the ones my mom had gotten as a wedding gift and never let either of us touch, were gone from the cabinet above the stove. The cabinet sat open, like a mouth, empty. I went down the hallway to my parents' room. Their closet, bare rod, a few wire hangers, a single forgotten dress sock on the floor, dark navy, which for some reason was the thing that made my chest tighten first. Trent's room, the same. His Xbox, his posters, the framed photo from his high school graduation. Gone, gone, gone. I walked back to the kitchen because I didn't know where else to go, and that's when I saw it on the counter. A piece of paper, folded once, my name written on the front in black Sharpie, my mother's neat, looping cursive. Maya. I stood there for a long time before I picked it up. Maya, we've moved to be closer to Trent's new opportunity in Columbus. It was a quick decision. The lease here runs out in 6 weeks. You're a smart girl. You'll figure it out. Mom. No address, no forwarding number, no we love you at the bottom. I read it 3 times, then I sat down on the kitchen floor, the linoleum, cold even through my jeans, and I sat there until the porch light clicked off on its timer and the house went dark around me. I didn't cry, not right away. What I felt wasn't even sadness exactly. It was something quieter and more disorienting. The sensation of reaching for a wall to steady yourself and finding nothing there. Like the architecture of your life just quietly removed itself and nobody bothered to mention it. 6 weeks, I thought. I have 6 weeks before the lease is up. I have $83 in my account. I have a shift tomorrow morning at 7. I didn't call Dara that night. I didn't call anyone. I made myself get up off that floor, drink a glass of water, and go to bed, because in 6 weeks I was going to need every functional hour I had, and falling apart on a kitchen floor in the dark was not a plan. I called my mother the next morning, twice. Her phone rang 4 times and went to voicemail. I called my dad's number, the one I had memorized since I was 8 years old, disconnected. The recording said the number was no longer in service. I sat in my diner uniform in the parking lot of the Mountaineer and stared at that information for a full minute before I walked inside and started my shift. I told no one at work. I told no one at school. For 2 full weeks, I walked through my life like a stage actor who has forgotten the audience is there. Lines delivered, marks hit, nothing showing. It was Dara who finally noticed. She showed up at my door on a Wednesday evening with Taco Bell and a look on her face that said she already knew something was wrong. I let her in. She walked through the half-emptied house without saying anything, sat down on the couch. Looked at me. Maya, she said, just my name. And that was the thing that broke it open. Not the note, not the empty closets, just Dara saying my name in a voice that meant I see you. We sat on that couch until 2 in the morning. I talked. She listened. She cried more than I did. At the end of it, she said I could sleep on her parents' pullout when the lease ended. Her mom, Patricia, had already told her to offer. I hadn't even known Dara had told her mother. That was the first time in weeks I felt something other than numb. What I didn't tell Dara, what I didn't tell anyone, was that I had kept calling. Every other day, rotating between my mother's voicemail, a number I found for my Aunt Ruth, a last-ditch call to the dental office where my mom used to work. Nobody answered. Nobody called back. I left exactly 12 messages in 30 days. I know because I wrote them down. Date, time, content. In the after folder, right behind the college printouts, I think, somewhere underneath the numbness, I believed they would call. I believed there had been some emergency, some crisis, some reason this wasn't what it looked like. I was 17. I still had that particular kind of faith that parents don't just leave. 3 weeks before the lease expired, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. Columbus area code. My heart hit my throat. My mother's voice, unhurried, like she was returning a call about a dentist appointment. "Oh, Maya, I got your messages. I've just been so busy with the move. Everything is chaos over here. How are you doing?" I pressed the phone so hard against my ear I could feel my pulse in my temple. I chose every word I said next with the precision of someone diffusing something. "Mom?" My voice came out steadier than I expected. "Why didn't you tell me you were leaving?" A pause. The specific pause of someone deciding how much to explain. It was a quick decision, like I said in the note, and honestly, you would have made it into a whole thing. You know how you get. I was 17. I was going to be alone in the house. "You're almost 18, Maya, and you've always been the capable one." That's a compliment. The capable one. I repeated it back to her so she could hear what it sounded like. She sighed, the sigh of someone who finds a conversation tiresome. "Don't be dramatic. You have Dara. You have school. You always land on your feet." In the background, I could hear my father's voice, low, indistinct. A TV, laughter. The ordinary sounds of a household that had simply relocated and continued without me in it. "Dad, can I talk to Dad?" A beat of silence. Then, "He's busy right now, honey. I'll tell him you called." She hung up first. I sat in the parking lot of the Mountaineer Diner for 23 minutes after that call. I know because I looked at the clock when it ended and again when I finally got out of the car. In between, I came to a conclusion. Quiet, private, entirely my own. No crying, no screaming, just a decision that settled into my chest like something finally, irreversibly clicking into place. Okay, I thought. Then I'll figure it out. And the part I didn't know yet, the part that would take 11 more years to fully understand, was what figuring it out would eventually uncover. Because they hadn't just left me behind. And the note on the counter wasn't the only thing they'd forgotten to mention. Somewhere in the paperwork of my family's life, in a document signed by my grandmother before I was old enough to read, there was something with my name on it. Something my mother had been quietly spending for years, counting on the fact that I would never think to look. Here is what nobody tells you about surviving something like that. They tell you about the anger. They tell you about the grief. They write songs about it, make movies about it, fill entire therapy waiting rooms with people processing versions of it. What nobody prepares you for is the functioning, the way you can be completely hollowed out and still show up for a morning shift. Still smile at the regulars, still refill the coffee, still count your tips at the end of the night and calculate exactly how many hours you need to work before you can cover a security deposit on a room somewhere. That's what the first year looked like for me. Not dramatic, not cinematic, just relentlessly, exhaustingly functional. I graduated from Robert C. Byrd High School on a Thursday afternoon in late May. Dara's parents sat in the bleachers. Her mom, Patricia, wore a yellow dress and cried. Her dad took photos on a digital camera he'd owned since 2009 and hasn't replaced since. After the ceremony, they took me to Applebee's and let me order whatever I wanted, and Patricia kept touching my arm across the table in that way that meant she knew and she was sorry, and she didn't know what else to do. I sent my mother a text that evening. 4 words. "I graduated today. Maya." She replied 11 days later, "Great news. We always knew you would. So proud." I screenshotted it, filed it in a folder on my phone I labeled Documents. I didn't know why. I just did. Some part of me already knew I'd need it someday. I just didn't know what for yet. I deferred my community college enrollment that fall. I couldn't afford the fees, even with the financial aid I'd been approved for, and I wasn't willing to take on debt for a semester I'd have to drop out of halfway through when my money ran out. So I worked. 2 jobs, the Mountaineer during breakfast and lunch, and a housekeeping position at the Stonewall Jackson Hotel on Main Street 3 evenings a week. I rented a room in a shared house on Chestnut Street, 4 tenants, 1 bathroom, a landlord named Boyd who lived in Morgantown, and texted instead of calling. The room was $380 a month. It had a window that faced a brick wall and a radiator that clanged every night at 2 a.m., like it had somewhere to be. I lived there for 14 months, I want to be honest about those 14 months because I think people sometimes tell this part of the story like it was noble, like they were quietly, gracefully surviving. The truth is, I was 23 days late on rent twice. I ate peanut butter crackers for dinner more times than I want to count. I sat in my car in a parking garage on a Tuesday in January and cried for 40 minutes because I was tired in a way that sleep wasn't fixing, and because I had seen a woman at the diner that morning who looked like my mother from behind, same set to her shoulders, same way of carrying her purse, and my stomach had clenched up so hard I'd had to excuse myself to the walk-in cooler to pull it back together. I gave myself those 40 minutes, I told myself afterward. That's the last time. It wasn't the last time. But I got better at making it shorter. The thing that changed the trajectory, not dramatically, not all at once, but in the slow way that real things change, was a woman named Renata Oakes. She was 53, a corporate attorney out of Pittsburgh, in Clarksburg, on a consulting contract for a regional manufacturing company that was trying to restructure before it went under. She stayed at the Stonewall Jackson for 6 weeks that winter, which in housekeeping terms meant I saw her room every Tuesday and Thursday evening. Most guests don't talk to housekeeping staff. Renata talked to everyone, not in a performative way. She wasn't networking, wasn't being deliberately charming. She was just the kind of person who was genuinely curious about whoever was in front of her. She asked me my name on the second week, asked what I was studying. When I said I hadn't started yet, she asked why. When I told her, she didn't do what most people did, which was make a sympathetic noise and change the subject. She just nodded slowly, like she was filing the information. "You going to stay in Clarksburg?" she asked. "No," I said. First time I'd said it out loud that plainly. She nodded again. Good. That was most of it, the first few conversations. But one evening in late February, she came back to the hotel while I was finishing her floor, carrying a tote bag full of paperwork, and she set it on the desk and said, almost to herself, 37 years of contract law and estate work and families still find ways to surprise me. I asked, without thinking, what happened? She looked at me for a second, like she was deciding something. Then she sat down in the desk chair and told me, no names, nothing specific, about a family she'd been advising, where a trust that had existed for decades had been quietly mismanaged by the people meant to protect it, and the beneficiaries who'd been left out didn't even know they had a claim. How does that happen? I asked. How do people not know? Because nobody tells them, she said. Money is the thing families are least honest about. They'll talk about affairs, addictions, criminal records before they'll sit down and explain to someone what they're actually entitled to. I thought about that for a long time after I left her room. I didn't know why it stuck the way it did. I told myself it was just interesting. I was wrong about why it was interesting. Renata left in March. Before she checked out, she left something on the desk in her room. I found it when I turned it over the morning after her departure. A book, Fundamentals of Trust and Estate Law, 3rd edition. On the inside cover in her handwriting, "For the one who's going somewhere, R.O." I read it in 6 days, annotated every margin, took notes in a spiral notebook I bought from the CVS on Pike Street. I understood maybe 60% of it, enough to know I wanted to understand the other 40. I called the community college the following Monday, re-enrolled for the fall semester, figured out the gap in my finances by picking up an extra weekend shift and applying for an emergency grant I found listed on a community board at the library. I got it. $240. It was exactly enough. I have thought about that $240 many times since. How close the margin was. How different everything might have looked if I hadn't walked past that board on a Tuesday. I won't walk you through all 8 years of school. What I'll tell you is what matters. Community college, then a transfer to West Virginia University on a partial scholarship. Business and finance, with a concentration in estate planning. I was never the loudest person in any classroom. I was always the most prepared. My professors learned quickly that I had read the assignment, the supplementary reading, and usually one additional source they hadn't assigned. Not to impress anyone, Because I had learned, in that room on Chestnut Street, that information is the only resource that doesn't run out when your bank account does. I graduated from WVU at 24 with honors and a job offer from a regional consulting firm in Charleston. I took it. I stayed 3 years, got promoted twice, learned everything they could teach me about how family money moves, how it's structured, how it's protected, how it's hidden, and how it's stolen from the people it was meant for. At 27, I was recruited by a larger firm out of Columbus, Ohio. I almost didn't take it because of the city. Columbus, where my family had moved, where they had built a life with Trent's name in the center of it and mine nowhere on the map. I took it anyway, because by then I understood something that took me a long time to learn. Proximity to the people who hurt you is only dangerous if you haven't figured out who you are yet. By 27, I knew exactly who I was. I had not spoken to my mother in 4 years when Aunt Ruth called. Ruth was my father's older sister, 71, living in Morgantown, the only member of my extended family who had maintained any contact with me after the move. Sporadic contact, to be fair, a birthday card most years, a phone call at Christmas that sometimes came and sometimes didn't, but consistent enough that when her number appeared on my phone on a Sunday afternoon in November, I picked up without hesitating. She didn't sound right. Her voice had a quality to it I hadn't heard before, slower, slightly uncertain, like she was reading from a script she kept losing her place on. "Maya, honey," she said, "I need some help with my papers." She had been diagnosed with early-stage dementia 8 months earlier, she told me. Her daughter, my cousin Bethany, who I barely knew, had moved her into a memory care facility outside Morgantown. Bethany was handling most things but was overwhelmed, and Ruth had asked specifically for me to come look through some of her personal files, make sure everything was in order. "You always were the organized one," Ruth said. There it is again, I thought. The capable one, the organized one, the one who can handle it. I drove to Morgantown the following Saturday, 3 hours. I brought coffee and the kind of butter cookies Ruth had always kept in a tin on her kitchen counter, even though she didn't have a kitchen anymore. The facility smelled like industrial cleaner and artificial flowers. Ruth's room was small, but she'd filled it with things from her house. A quilt her mother had made, a framed photo of her and my father from what looked like the 1980s, a ceramic cardinal on the windowsill. She was lucid that day, mostly, sharp in bursts. Her files were in a cardboard box in the closet, a lifetime of paperwork in manila folders, rubber-banded by year, insurance documents, property records, medical files, old correspondence. I worked through them methodically while Ruth dozed in her chair by the window, and I was nearly through the last folder when something stopped me. An envelope, old. The paper had gone slightly yellow at the edges, my grandmother's name in the return address. Mailed to Ruth in 1987, which would have been 2 years before I was born. I almost set it aside. It was old family correspondence, nothing to do with Ruth's current affairs. But something about the weight of it made me open it. The letter inside was 2 pages, handwritten, my grandmother talking about the family, about her plans, about her wishes for the future. Ordinary things. And then, near the bottom of the second page, a paragraph that made me stop breathing for a moment. She was writing about a trust, a family trust she and my grandfather had established, for their grandchildren. All of them, she wrote, underlined, equally as they come. I want them all to know they are provided for. I read that paragraph 3 times. Then I sat very still in Ruth's room for a long time, listening to the ceramic cardinal on the windowsill and the sound of my aunt breathing in her chair. All of them, equally. I was a grandchild. I had always been a grandchild. So why had no one ever mentioned this to me? I drove back to Columbus that night instead of the morning. 5 hours, mostly in the dark, mostly in silence because I couldn't focus on music or a podcast or anything other than the thought that was running in a loop in my mind. There was a trust, with my name in it, and my mother had been the family's bookkeeper since 1994. I pulled into my parking garage at 11:30 p.m., sat in my car under the fluorescent lights, and called the only person I trusted to tell me if I was reading this correctly. Renata Oakes picked up on the 3rd ring. "It's Maya Calloway," I said. I'm sorry to call late. I found something today and I need to know if it means what I think it means. End quote. A pause, then her voice, steady as ever. Tell me what you found. I told her. All of it. The letter, the trust, the dates, my mother's role as bookkeeper, the 12 years of silence. When I finished, there was a long quiet on the line. Then Renata said 4 words. Don't say anything yet. What do you mean? I mean, don't call your mother. Don't call your father. Don't tell anyone what you found until you know exactly what's in that trust and exactly what's been done with it. She paused. Do you have the letter? I have a photo of it. Good, I'm going to give you a name. A probate attorney in Columbus. His name is James Cho. He's methodical, he's careful, and he does not lose. Another pause. Maya, how long ago did they leave you? 12 years, I said. Silence. Call James Monday morning, she said. First thing. Maybe you already know what it feels like to discover that someone took something from you and counted on you never finding out. Maybe you know the particular cold of that, not hot anger, not yet, just the slow, clarifying certainty that you were right to keep the note, that you were right to document everything, that the folder labeled after was always going to mean more than you knew. I don't know what you would have done in that parking garage at 11:30 at night. I only know what I did. I sat there for exactly 6 minutes. Then I went upstairs, opened my laptop, and started building a file. James Cho was 38, precise in the way that people are precise when they genuinely love what they do, and he had the particular quality I'd come to value most in professional people. He did not perform reassurance. He looked at the evidence and he told you what it meant. We met on a Monday morning in his office on Broad Street. I brought the photo of the letter, a timeline I'd drafted the night before, and 12 years of documentation I hadn't known I was building until now. Every call log, every screenshot, every saved voicemail, every note from my after folder, every date and conversation I'd recorded in the years before I understood why I was recording them. He looked at what I laid on the table. He didn't say anything for a while. Then, you kept all of this. I didn't know I was keeping it for a reason, I said. I just didn't throw things away. He looked up at me. That's going to matter a great deal. He spent the next 2 weeks pulling the trust records. What he found, what we found, was worse and cleaner than I had imagined. Worse, because the withdrawals went back 11 years, starting roughly 8 months after my family moved to Columbus. Cleaner, because the trust had been set up under my grandmother's specific terms and had never been legally amended to remove my share. My mother had simply begun drawing on it as though my portion didn't exist, as though I didn't exist. My share, untouched in terms of entitlement, compounded over 12 years, approximately $340,000, plus the withdrawals that had gone to Trent's training program, the relocation. The redecorated house on the east side of Columbus that I had seen once in a Facebook photo Dara had accidentally shown me. James set down his pen and looked at me across the desk. Maya, he said, they left you a note and took your inheritance. I already knew. I had known since the parking garage. But hearing it said plainly, in a lawyer's office on a Monday morning, made it real in a different way. I took a breath, let it out slowly. What do we do first? I asked, and then my phone buzzed. Unknown number, Columbus area code, a text message, 4 lines. Hi, honey. I know it's been a long time. Dad and I would really love to reconnect. Trent is getting married in the spring, and we'd love for you to be there. Family is family. Mom, I stared at it for a long moment. James was watching me, reading my expression the way lawyers learn to read expressions. Something wrong, he said. I turned the phone around and showed him the message. He read it again, then he looked at me with something I hadn't expected on his face. Not surprise, not pity, something that looked almost like the beginning of a plan. Interesting timing, he said quietly. Interesting timing. I set the phone face down on the desk. It always is, I said. I typed my response to my mother's text while still sitting in James Cho's office. I didn't rush it. I didn't labor over it either. I just thought about what Carol Calloway would need to read to believe everything was exactly as she had left it. that I was still the daughter who could be set aside and picked back up like something left in a drawer. Hi, Mom. Of course. I'd love to reconnect. It's been too long. 12 words. I hit send. James watched me do it. He didn't say anything until I put the phone back in my bag. You're not going to tell her. Not yet, I said. He nodded slowly. Good, because before you do anything else, I need to know exactly what condition this trust is in and exactly how they've been moving the money. That takes time. How much time? 6 to 8 weeks for a full accounting request. Maybe less if Holt, their attorney, cooperates. Maybe more if he doesn't. Holt. I wrote the name down. Theodore Holt, 71 years old, had been managing my mother's family's legal affairs since the 90s. Retirement adjacent, James had called him. The kind of attorney who'd been doing things a certain way for so long he'd stopped imagining anyone would look closely enough to question it. That kind of comfort, I thought, is exactly how people get caught. I'll wait, I said. The 6 weeks that followed were the strangest of my life. Not because they were dramatic, because they weren't. I went to work every morning at the firm. I pulled estate files for clients who had no idea how lucky they were to have families that communicated. I ate lunch at my desk. I ran 3 miles every other evening along the Scioto River. I called Dara every Sunday, same as always, and I didn't tell her anything yet, because telling Dara meant Dara would worry, and I needed her steady when I eventually needed her at all. Meanwhile, I texted my mother, not often, twice a week maybe. Short, warm messages. How's the planning going? Is Trent nervous about the wedding? Dad doing okay? The kind of texts a reconnecting daughter sends. The kind that ask just enough to get information back. Carol, it turned out, loved to give information back. She texted in paragraphs. She told me about the wedding venue, a banquet hall in Gahanna, east side of Columbus, booked for the last Saturday in April. She told me about Trent's fiancée, Nadia, whom she described as sweet but very particular about everything, which I understood to mean Nadia had opinions Carol couldn't override. She told me Gerald had been having some memory issues, small things, she said, forgetfulness, a few incidents, but that the doctors weren't concerned yet. She told me they were hoping to update some of the family's financial arrangements before the wedding. Just to get everything organized, she said. You know how Trent is. We want to make sure things are in order before he starts a new chapter. I read that text 3 times. Then I forwarded it to James. His reply came 4 minutes later. She's moving to consolidate the trust before the marriage. We need to accelerate the accounting request. Call me tomorrow morning. James filed the formal accounting demand through Holt's office on a Thursday. By the following Tuesday, we had our first indication of how worried Carol actually was, because Holt called James directly, which attorneys only do when their clients are rattled enough to skip the paperwork phase. James told me about the call that evening. He was fishing, James said, wanted to know what you knew, how you found out, whether this was a misunderstanding that could be resolved quietly. What did you say? I said we'd be in touch. A pause. He's going to advise them to push back. Claim you abandoned any beneficiary interest through estrangement, voluntary disengagement from the family. End quote. I had been waiting for this. I have 12 voicemails I left between October and November of the year they moved. I have the text I sent my mother the night I graduated. I have 17 documented contact attempts in the first year alone. I know, James said. I've seen them. That's why they're not going to win that argument. Another pause. Maya, I need to ask you something. Are you sure you want to proceed this way? Once we file formally, there's no quiet version of this anymore. I thought about the kitchen floor, the linoleum, cold through my jeans, the porch light clicking off. There was never going to be a quiet version, I said. They just assumed I'd be the quiet one. My mother called, actually called, not texted, on a Friday evening in late January. I was in my apartment, had just gotten home from the office. Still in my work clothes, I stood at my kitchen counter and let it ring once, twice, 3 times, arranging my face into something neutral even though she couldn't see me. Because voices carry expressions, I've always believed that. I picked up on the 4th ring. Mom, Hi, Maya. Her voice was warm, carefully warm, the way a room feels when someone has just turned on the heat after a cold snap. Technically comfortable, but you can still feel where the cold was. It's so good to hear your voice, honey. We've been so looking forward to reconnecting. Like the decision to reach out had been mutual, like she and Gerald had sat down together and agreed equally that it was time. Me too, I said. She talked for 20 minutes. I listened, asked small questions, laughed in the right places. She told me about Trent's job. He was managing a crew for a commercial contractor, doing well. She told me about a trip she and Gerald were planning, maybe somewhere warm after the wedding. She told me about the neighborhood, the neighbors, the small domestic details of a life I'd been excluded from for 12 years. She did not mention the trust. I did not mention the trust. Near the end of the call, she said, "We were thinking, would you want to come for a visit? Before the wedding, just dinner, the four of us, nothing formal, just family." I let a beat of silence go by, just long enough to seem like consideration. "I'd really like that," I said. She made a sound, soft, relieved. "I'm so glad, Maya. I really am. I've missed you." "I know," I thought. "I know exactly when you started missing me, and exactly what changed." "I've missed you too, Mom," I said. I told James about the dinner invitation the next morning. "Go," he said immediately. "I know. Listen more than you talk. If anyone mentions the trust or the financial arrangements, let them lead. Don't react. Don't confirm or deny what you know." "I know, James." "And if you meet the fiancé?" "I know," I said. He paused. "You've done this before." "Not this exactly," I said. "But I've spent 8 years watching how families hide money. I know what people look like when they're protecting something. I'll recognize it." I drove to Columbus on a Saturday in early February, 3 hours south, down I-77, the interstate cutting through flat winter farmland, everything gray and bare. I had been to Columbus exactly once since moving here for work, and that had been a conference downtown where I'd stayed in a hotel and left before noon on Sunday. I had not driven through the East Side neighborhoods where my family lived. I had made a deliberate decision not to. Today I drove through them. Their house was on Fenwick Drive, a quiet street of mid-century ranch homes with 2-car garages and mature oaks that in summer would make a canopy over the road. In February, they were just bare branches against a white sky. The house was beige with navy shutters, a wreath on the door, seasonal, red berries, dried eucalyptus, my mother's taste exactly. The driveway had 2 cars, a Buick I recognized as my father's, and a newer Honda Civic I didn't. I sat outside for exactly 4 minutes, then I got out. My mother opened the door before I reached the porch. She looked older, of course she did. 12 years is 12 years, but also somehow more settled, like she'd grown into the image she'd always been trying to project. Hair professionally colored, a careful blouse, reading glasses pushed up on her head. She opened her arms and I walked into them and we hugged the way people hug when they are performing warmth for each other and both know it and neither says so. "You look wonderful," she said, holding me at arm's length, evaluating. "You really do." "So do you, Mom." Gerald appeared in the hallway behind her. He'd aged more noticeably, thinner than I remembered, moving slightly carefully, like he was being deliberate about it. When he hugged me, he held on a moment longer than I expected. He didn't say much at first, just, "Maya, good to see you, kiddo." Kiddo! He'd called me that my entire childhood. Something about it hit a register I wasn't prepared for. I kept my expression even. Trent arrived 20 minutes later with Nadia. He came in loud, the way Trent always came in, filling the room immediately, arms out, big smile, the performance of a man who was always slightly more comfortable with an audience. "Little sis," he said, like we were the kind of siblings who used phrases like that. "Trent," I said and smiled back. Nadia was quieter than I'd expected from my mother's descriptions. Tall, dark-haired, with the kind of careful posture that said she was paying attention to everything in the room and had learned not to show it. She shook my hand, not a hug, a handshake, and looked at me with dark, direct eyes. "I've heard a lot about you," she said. Same, I said. Congratulations on the engagement. Something shifted in her expression. Small, almost nothing. I filed it away. Dinner was a performance in 3 acts. The first act was pleasantries. Carol's pot roast, the good china, careful conversation about neutral topics. How long was the drive? What's Columbus like these days? Trent talking about a big contract his crew had just landed. Gerald eating steadily and quietly, contributing just enough to not seem absent. The second act was the careful approach. Carol began steering. She had always been skilled at steering conversation, moving it the direction she wanted while making it seem organic. It's so important, family, she said at one point, filling her wine glass. Especially as you get older, you start to realize what actually matters. You start to realize, I thought. Interesting verb tense. Absolutely, I said. We've been doing some reorganizing, Carol continued, the casualness of it too deliberate. Financially, just making sure everything is tidy before Trent and Nadia start their life together. You know how these things can get complicated. I reached for my water glass. Took a slow sip. That makes sense, I said, tying up loose ends. The phrase landed. I watched Carol's eyes move, just slightly. She hadn't expected me to use those words back at her. She recovered immediately. Carol always recovered immediately, but I had seen it. She knows something is already in motion. She just doesn't know how much. Trent said something about the wedding timeline. The conversation moved on. I let it. The third act happened in the kitchen. After dinner, Carol and Trent went to the living room. Gerald excused himself. Tired, he said, going to rest for a bit. I offered to help clear up. Nadia stayed to help. We worked in silence for a few minutes, falling into the easy rhythm of 2 people who are both comfortable with quiet. Then Nadia said, without looking up from the dish she was rinsing, "She talks about you sometimes, your mom." I kept my expression neutral. Good things, I hope. A pause. "She says you were always the independent one, that you didn't need much." Another pause. "She says it like it's a fact, like it's just how you were born." I looked at her. Nadia set the dish in the drying rack and turned to face me. She had the look of someone who had been deciding something for a while and had just finished deciding. 2 weeks before you came tonight, she said, keeping her voice low, I heard her on the phone with an attorney, not Trent's usual guy, an older man. She was talking about moving Trent to sole trustee of something before the wedding. I didn't know what she meant. She looked at me directly, but then she mentioned your name, said it shouldn't be complicated because you'd been out of the picture for years. The kitchen was very quiet. Out of the picture, I said. I didn't know if I should tell you, but you drove 3 hours to have dinner with people you haven't spoken to in over a decade and, she stopped. It seemed like you deserved to know what you were walking into. I looked at this woman, Trent's fiancée, who had known me for 4 hours, who had no stake in what I was doing and nothing to gain from telling me this, and I felt something that surprised me. Not gratitude exactly, something quieter. The recognition of someone choosing honesty in a room that had been running on the opposite for a very long time. Thank you, I said. I mean that. She nodded once, turned back to the sink. I'm not trying to blow anything up, she said quietly. I just think some things should be fair. So do I thought. So do I. I said my goodbyes at 8:30. My mother hugged me again at the door, held on a breath too long, said we'd do this again soon. Gerald squeezed my hand. Trent clapped me on the shoulder and called me little sis again. I drove exactly 6 blocks before I pulled over and called James. She's moving to consolidate before the wedding, I said. She contacted Holt directly. Nadia overheard it. They're trying to push through a trustee change before the marriage makes Nadia a stakeholder in Trent's affairs. James was quiet for a moment. They're accelerating because they're nervous. They're nervous because they're guilty. Maya, his voice shifted, careful and precise, the way it got when something mattered. Under the trust's original terms, there may be a clause, common in trusts of this era, that requires a formal beneficiary review upon the marriage of any named heir. If Trent marries before we file, they could attempt to trigger that review and argue you're an inactive party, end quote. The math landed immediately, which means if we don't file before the wedding, they could make it significantly harder to establish your standing. A pause. The wedding is the last Saturday in April. That gives us 11 weeks. I stared through the windshield at the quiet Columbus Street, a dog walker passing under a streetlight, two ordinary houses with their ordinary lights on. 11 weeks. James, I said, what do we need to file first? A formal claim asserting your beneficiary rights, a request for a complete trust accounting going back to the first withdrawal, and a motion to freeze any trustee changes pending the review. A beat. I can have the paperwork drafted by Thursday. Draft it, I said. Maya, once I file this, they'll know. There's no taking it back. I know. Your mother will call you. I know. It's going to get complicated. I thought about Nadia at the sink, choosing honesty in a house built on the opposite. I thought about Renata Oakes leaving a book on a hotel desk. I thought about a gallon Ziploc bag with a 3-sentence note inside it, carried in a backpack for 12 years. James, I said, it was always complicated. We're just the first ones to say so out loud. I heard him exhale. Then, Thursday morning, I'll have everything ready. Good, I ended the call, sat in the dark for a moment. Outside, the dog walker had turned the corner, and the street was empty and still. Then, quietly, privately, in a car parked on a side street 6 blocks from the house I was never invited to, I let myself smile. Not yet, I thought, but soon. James Cho filed on a Monday morning, a formal claim asserting my rights as a named beneficiary of the Eleanor Ruth Pruitt Family Trust, established 1984, a demand for complete accounting of all trust withdrawals from 2002 to present. A motion to freeze any and all trustee designation changes pending beneficiary review. Theodore Holt received the filing at 11:17 a.m. Carol called me at 11:49. I was in a meeting. I watched her name light up on my phone screen, watched it ring, watched it go to voicemail. I texted her back at 1 p.m. Sorry, I'm in back-to-back meetings today. Can I call you tonight? She replied in 4 minutes. Call me right now, please. I did not call her right now. Carol called 4 more times that afternoon. I let everyone go to voicemail, not out of cruelty, or not only that, out of precision, because I had learned, in 12 years of being underestimated by people who loved the idea of me more than they loved me, that the most powerful thing you can do in a moment of conflict is control the timing. Let the other person run. Let them fill the silence with everything they're afraid of. By the time you speak, you already know more than they meant to tell you. At 6:15 p.m., I called her back. She picked up before the first ring finished. Maya. Her voice had a quality I had never heard in it before. Not anger, not yet. Something tighter than anger. The sound of a person who has spent the afternoon being told by their attorney that the ground they were standing on is less solid than they thought. Hi, Mom, I said. Sorry about the missed calls. Busy day. A breath. I heard from Ted Holt today. He said you filed something. Some kind of legal claim. That's right. Silence. I waited. Maya. Her voice shifted. Softer now. Attempting warmth. The way she'd always attempted warmth when she needed something. I don't understand why you would do something like this without talking to us first. We just had dinner. We were reconnecting. As a family. As a family. I let the phrase sit for a moment before I answered. Mom, I said, I filed a claim because I'm a beneficiary of Grandma Eleanor's trust and I've never received my share. That's not a family conversation. That's a legal matter. A longer silence. That trust was... Things were complicated with the trust, Maya. There were expenses. Your father's company had a rough year. We had to make decisions. You made decisions about my portion of the trust without telling me it existed, I said, calmly, flatly, not a question, nothing on the line for a long moment, just the faint sound of a television somewhere in their house. The same background noise from the phone call 12 years ago when she'd told me I was almost 18 and capable and would land on my feet. I think, she said finally, we should all sit down together and talk about this before it becomes something bigger than it needs to be. I agree, I said. Have Ted Holt's office contact James Cho. We'll set something up. I heard her exhale, sharp, involuntary. She hadn't expected me to have an attorney's name ready. She had expected, what? The 17-year-old on the kitchen floor. The girl who would cry, or rage, or beg, or accept whatever explanation was offered because she didn't know what else to do. Maya, I'll talk to you soon, Mom, I said. Good night. I ended the call. Set the phone on my kitchen counter, stood there for a moment in the quiet of my apartment. One down, I thought. Now we wait for the rest of them. Gerald called the next morning, 7:42 a.m., before I'd left for the office. I almost didn't pick up, but something about the time, the earliness of it, the sense that he'd been awake for a while before he dialed, made me answer. Maya. His voice was quieter than my mother's, older, more tired. Hi, Dad. A long pause, the kind that means someone has been rehearsing what they want to say and has now forgotten it entirely. I know what we did, he said finally. Not just the money, all of it. I sat down slowly on the edge of my couch. I know, Dad. Your mother. She said you'd be fine. She always said that, and I let her say it because it was easier than the alternative. Another pause. I don't have a good reason. I've been trying to find one for 12 years. There isn't one. I was quiet for a moment. The morning light was coming through my window, pale and flat, the way February light comes in Columbus. Did you know about the trust? I asked. He didn't answer immediately. That was its own answer. I knew it existed, he said. I told myself Carol was handling it. I was good at telling myself things were being handled. I know, I thought. I know that's true. That's what makes it complicated. Gerald. I used his name, not Dad, and I heard him register the shift. I'm not asking you to fix it. James Cho is handling the legal side. But I needed to know if you understood what happened. I do, he said, quietly. I'm sorry, Maya. I don't expect that to change anything. It didn't change anything. It also wasn't nothing. I have held both of those truths at the same time since that phone call, and I've stopped trying to resolve them into one clean feeling. I'll be in touch, I said, through the attorneys for now. Okay, he said. Just that. Trent called that evening. He did not start with an apology. Maya. His voice had the edge in it I remembered from childhood, the particular tone he used when he felt something was being taken from him. What are you doing? Do you understand what this is going to do to the wedding? To Nadia? To everything we've been planning? I moved to my window, stood looking out at the city. Trent, I said, I'm not doing anything to your wedding. I'm asking for what Grandma Eleanor left me. Those are two different things. You've been gone for 12 years. I didn't leave, I said. Evenly. That's the part you need to be clear about. I didn't leave. I came home from a shift at the diner and the house was empty. There's a difference. Silence. It was complicated, Maya. You always made everything harder than it needed to be. Trent. I kept my voice quiet. You just said I was gone for 12 years, but then you said I made things harder. Which is it? Was I gone, or was I there making things difficult? Because it can't be both. I heard him stop, heard him realize what he'd said. I didn't mean it like that, he said. But slower now, less certain. I know, I said. Call me when you've had some time to think. I'm not trying to blow up your life. I'm just not disappearing again. I ended the call. He knew, I thought. Maybe not everything, maybe not the details, but he knew the house hadn't been empty when they left. He'd just spent 12 years not thinking about it too hard. The formal response from Holt's office arrived the following week. I had been expecting a counter-argument. What I had not been expecting was the specific shape of it, because it told me, more clearly than anything Carol had said on the phone, exactly how frightened they were. Their argument, I had voluntarily estranged myself from the family, had made no meaningful effort to maintain contact or participate in family financial matters, had demonstrated, through years of silence, an abandonment of any beneficiary interest. I read it twice. Then I sent it to James with a single line. They have no idea what I kept. He called me 10 minutes later. I could hear something in his voice that wasn't quite a smile, but was adjacent to one. Walk me through it one more time, he said. Everything you have. 12 documented phone calls in the first month after they left. 17 contact attempts in the first year, all logged with dates and times. The voicemails I left that went unanswered, I have recordings of 9 of them. The text I sent the night I graduated. The screenshot of my mother's response 11 days later. The letter from my Aunt Ruth's files. The forwarded text where my mother mentioned consolidating the family finances before the wedding. I paused. And the journal? Tell me about the journal again. I started keeping it at 17. I've kept it ever since. Every significant interaction with my family. Dates, words used, context. Including the phone call where my mother told me I would have made things dramatic. Including the call where my father's number was disconnected. Including the conversation when she said I always land on my feet. James was quiet for a moment. Maya, he said, they built their entire defense on the assumption that you had nothing. That you were the kind of person who doesn't keep records. I know, I said. They forgot they were the ones who taught me to keep records. When you have nothing, you document everything. It's the only currency that doesn't run out. What happened next didn't look like a courtroom drama. I want to be honest about that because I think people expect the big scene, the judge, the gavel, the moment the villain is exposed in front of a crowded room. That's not what justice looked like in my case. Justice looked like a Tuesday afternoon phone call from James telling me that Theodore Holt had advised Carol and Gerald to settle. He walked me through it carefully. The accounting they'd been forced to produce had not helped their position. 11 years of withdrawals from my share of the trust, clearly documented, totaling far more than they'd apparently anticipated being accountable for. The evidence of my contact attempts demolished the estrangement argument completely. And Nadia, quietly, without drama, without Trent's knowledge until afterward, had submitted a written statement confirming what she'd overheard between Carol and Holt in the weeks before my visit. She hadn't done it to hurt Trent. She'd done it because she had looked at what was in front of her and decided she wasn't going to begin her marriage by becoming part of something that wasn't fair. I respected that more than I can adequately say. How much? I asked James. He told me the number. My full share of the trust, plus 12 years of accrued interest, plus legal fees. The number was larger than I had let myself calculate during the months we'd been building the case, because I had learned early not to spend money you haven't received yet. It was enough to change the shape of several years of my life. It was also, in a way that I couldn't explain cleanly to anyone, almost beside the point. Okay, I said. James paused. That's it? Okay? What would you like me to say? A short silence. I don't know. Most clients cry, or cheer, or something. I looked out my office window at the Columbus skyline, gray and familiar now after 2 years. I'll feel it later, I said. Right now, I just need to know it's done. It's done, he said. Pending signatures, which Holt will have back to us by Friday. It's done, Maya. Carol asked to meet in person 3 weeks after the signatures. I had half expected her not to. Half expected her to absorb the settlement the way she'd absorbed everything else, quietly, privately, without acknowledgement. But she called on a Sunday evening and asked, in a voice that had some quality in it I hadn't heard before, if I would have coffee with her. Just the two of us. Neutral ground. I said yes. Not because I owed her a conversation, because I had one thing I needed to say out loud, to her face, and I had been carrying it long enough. We met at a place on High Street, a coffee shop neither of us had been to before. She was already there when I arrived, sitting at a corner table, hands around a mug. She looked smaller than I expected. Not physically, she hadn't changed that much, but something in her carriage had shifted. The certainty she used to carry, that particular uprightness of a woman who believed she was always the most reasonable person in any room, had loosened somehow. She started talking almost immediately. I had expected this. Carol filled silence like water fills a low space, automatically without thinking. She had prepared what she wanted to say. I could hear the preparation in it. There was a version of the story she had refined, in which the decision to leave had been complicated, in which they had always meant to send for me or send money or handle it differently, in which the trust had been a misunderstanding of a misunderstanding, in which she had genuinely believed I was fine because I seemed fine, because I had always seemed fine, because I was the capable one and capable people don't need to be asked about. I let her finish. All of it. I didn't interrupt once. When she was done, I was quiet for a moment. Outside the window, High Street moved through an ordinary Tuesday afternoon. People with coffees, people on phones, a kid on a bicycle cutting between parked cars. "Mom," I said, "I needed you to be my parents. That was all I needed. Not money, not explanation, not a plan. I needed you to be my parents." She opened her mouth. I put my hand up, gently. "I'm not asking you to agree with me. I'm not asking you to say you were wrong. I've stopped needing either of those things." I looked at her directly. "I'm telling you what it cost me, because I needed to say it once, out loud, to your face. That's all I came here for." She looked at me for a long moment. Her eyes were wet. I noticed this without it changing anything in me. Not from coldness, but because I had cried my portion of tears over Carol Calloway a long time ago, in a parking lot, in a car, alone the way I had learned to do everything. I left a 20 on the table for both coffees. I walked out into the February afternoon and stood on the sidewalk for a moment, my breath showing in the cold air, and I felt something release in my chest. Not happiness exactly, not triumph, something quieter and more permanent than either. The feeling of having finally set something down that you carried so long you forgot it had weight. Trent and Nadia got married on the last Saturday in April. I wasn't there. Not out of spite. I had genuinely considered going, in the weeks after the settlement, and I had genuinely decided against it. Not because I wanted to punish anyone, because I understood, clearly and without anger, that I was not yet capable of sitting in a room and watching my family celebrate while the concrete was still drying on everything we had just been through. Maybe someday. Not that Saturday. I sent flowers the morning of. White peonies. Nadia had mentioned once, at that dinner in February, that they were her favorite. I included a card that said, "Wishing you both a life that is entirely your own. Maya." I meant every word of it, especially the part about it being their own. I used some of what I received from the settlement to fund a scholarship, anonymous, at Robert C. Byrd High School in Clarksburg for a junior or senior who demonstrated financial need and academic drive and was, in the language of the application, working toward something. I didn't put my name on it because it wasn't about my name. It was about the girl who had the after folder, the one who kept her tips in an envelope and mapped her savings against her goals and stayed functional through things that should have broken her. She exists somewhere in that school right now. She's doing everything right. She doesn't need a story about me. She just needs the door to be slightly more open than it was when I got there. Dara came to Columbus in May. We had dinner at a place downtown with good wine and better bread, and she sat across from me and said, "Okay, tell me everything. The real everything." End quote. So I did. All of it, start to finish, the way I've told it to you. 2.5 hours. She cried in 3 separate places. At the end of it, she looked at me with the same expression she'd had that Wednesday night in Clarksburg when she'd shown up with Taco Bell and found the half-empty house. "Maya," she said, "you have been carrying this entire time." "I know," I said. "And you're okay?" I thought about it. Actually thought about it, instead of answering automatically. "I think I'm better than okay," I said. I searched for the right word. Free. "I think that's the right word." She reached across the table and squeezed my hand and didn't say anything else, and that was exactly right. My father called on my birthday in June. Just him, from what sounded like a room away from the rest of the house. He said happy birthday. He asked how I was. We talked for 11 minutes about nothing particularly significant. The weather, a podcast he'd started listening to, whether I'd tried the new Thai place near my office that apparently everyone in Columbus was talking about. Before he hung up, he said, "I'm glad you're doing well, kiddo." I said, "I know, Dad." It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't a closed door either. It was the truth of where we were. 2 people on the phone, one of whom had failed the other badly enough that no conversation of 11 minutes was going to span it, both of whom were choosing to stay on the line anyway. I don't know what that becomes. I've stopped needing to know in advance. I still have the note, gallon Ziploc bag, pressed flat, tucked inside the lining of a blue canvas backpack that's more patch than original fabric at this point. I've thought, over the years, about what to do with it, whether to frame it, burn it, mail it back, throw it in the Kanawha River the next time I drive through Clarksburg. I haven't done any of those things. I don't think I will. Not because I need it anymore. I don't. I stopped needing it the moment I understood that the note was never really about me. It was about who my mother was, and what my father allowed, and the comfortable story they'd built around a girl they'd decided was fine without being asked. I keep it because it's mine. It was the first thing I was left with and the last thing I kept, and there is something right, something I can't quite articulate, about carrying your own origin story in a Ziploc bag in the lining of a worn-out backpack. It doesn't hurt anymore. It's just the beginning of the story. And beginnings, even the ones that were meant to diminish you, belong to you. You'll figure it out, she wrote. She had no idea how right she was. My name is Maya Calloway. I am 29 years old. I grew up in Clarksburg, West Virginia, and I was left behind when I was 17, and I figured it out. That's the whole story. That's enough. I've told you everything now. And I keep thinking about what my mother said on the phone that first night, that I would have made it dramatic. I've asked myself, in the years since, whether she was right, whether there was a version of this that didn't end in attorneys and settlements and two women talking across a coffee table in February. Maybe there was. Maybe if she'd given me a forwarding address. Maybe if Gerald had stayed on the line. Maybe if someone, at some point, had just asked. But here's what I want to know from you, and I mean this genuinely. If it had been you, if you had found that note on the counter at 17, would you have kept it, or would you have done what they expected and let it go?